She knew the law. She enforced the law. But when a power-hungry cop pulled her over and refused to acknowledge who she was, things took a dangerous turn, until karma hit back hard. The road was nearly empty, just a stretch of highway cutting through the night. Streetlights flickered past, their glow reflecting off the sleek black sedan cruising steadily in the right lane. Veronica Caldwell had been driving for nearly an hour, her mind still occupied with the classified briefing she had just left. Being the newly appointed FBI director meant long hours and even longer nights, but she was used to that. What she wasn't used to, what she hadn't expected, was the sudden burst of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her grip on the wheel tightened slightly, her eyes flicking to the speedometer. Exactly 65. Not a mile over. No erratic movements. No reason to be pulled over. Yet the police cruiser behind her didn't budge. She exhaled through her nose and signaled to the right, guiding her car onto the shoulder of the road. Years of experience told her there was nothing to be worried about. She had worked alongside law enforcement her entire career. She knew the protocol. She understood the system. But as the patrol car rolled to a stop behind her, something gnawed at the back of her mind. Why was the officer taking his time? Too much time. Veronica adjusted her rearview mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of him. Finally, the driver's side door of the cruiser swung open. The man who stepped out wasn't someone she recognized, which wasn't surprising. She didn't make it a habit to know every street cop in the state. But something about the way he moved. His posture was stiff, almost aggressive. His left hand rested on his belt, fingers curled near his firearm, while his right hand swung a flashlight back and forth as he walked up to her window. She pressed the button to lower the glass and kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. "Evening, officer." Her voice was calm, professional. The man peered down at her, the light flashing across her face. Too long, too intrusive. No greeting, no reason for the stop, just that. Veronica held back a sigh. This wasn't normal. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" she said evenly. The officer chewed his gum, staring at her for a bit too long before answering. "License. Registration." Veronica didn't move right away. Her instincts, the same instincts that had saved her life more than once in her career, told her this wasn't going to be routine. She needed to control the situation before it escalated. She spoke carefully. "Sir, I'm reaching for my purse on the passenger seat." No response. She moved slowly, retrieving her wallet and offering her FBI credentials along with her driver's license. The officer didn't take them. His eyes flickered across the ID, then back up to her. His expression didn't change. "FBI, huh?" She nodded once. "Yes, sir." Silence, and then, "Step out of the vehicle." The words weren't loud, but they landed like a slap. Veronica blinked. "Excuse me?" The officer took a half step back, his right hand now hovering near his firearm. "Step. Out." The tension in the air thickened, pressing against her ribs. There was no reason for this. She had followed protocol to the letter. She had identified herself. Yet this man, this officer, was treating her like a threat. Veronica had seen this before. Not personally, not like this. But she had read the reports. She had seen the footage. She was not about to become another headline. Her pulse was steady, but her mind was already running through her options. She knew how fast things could spiral. She also knew how to survive. But before she could decide her next move, the officer's patience snapped. He reached for the door handle. And that's when she knew. This wasn't just a traffic stop. This was something else entirely. But Veronica wasn't going to let fear dictate what happened next. She had spent her entire career preparing for moments exactly like this. And she wasn't going down without a fight. The click of the door handle sent a jolt through Veronica's body. Not fear, not yet, but sharp awareness. Her left hand shot out, gripping the inside handle before Officer Daniel Kearns could pull it open. "Sir, step back," she ordered, her voice firm but measured. You are outside of protocol." Kearns didn't move. If anything, his grip on the door tightened, his knuckles paling under the strain. "I said, step out of the car." She could hear it now, the edge in his voice, the control he was trying to exert. Veronica had dealt with men like him before. Men who mistook authority for dominance. Men who pushed lines just to see how much they could get away with. But this wasn't some power-hungry bureaucrat in a suit. This was a man with a badge, a gun, and a temper that made him dangerous. She tightened her grip on the door handle. "On what grounds, officer?" For the first time, Kearns hesitated. His lips parted, as if scrambling for a response. But instead of answering, he did something worse. He took a step closer. The flashlight was still in his left hand, aimed directly at her face, blinding her to everything but his silhouette. "I don't have to explain myself to you." Veronica didn't blink. "Actually, you do." The flashlight beam didn't waver, but his jaw flexed, irritation replacing whatever thread of composure he had left. "Lady, I don't give a damn who you work for." Veronica's heartbeat was steady, controlled, but the reality of the situation was shifting. This wasn't just aggression. It wasn't just a cop overstepping. He wanted her to be afraid. And fear. Fear was something Veronica Caldwell did not allow herself to feel. "Then let's call your superior and see if he gives a damn," she said coolly. That set him off. The flashlight dropped, and before she could react, his free hand slammed against the roof of her car. Hard. The sudden bang cut through the night, a sharp, violent sound that echoed down the empty stretch of road. "I said, get out." For the first time, Veronica glanced at his nameplate. D. Kearns. She would remember that name. Her fingers itched to grab her phone, but she knew any sudden movement could be misread. She had seen it too many times. So she kept her hands visible and leveled him with a look she had used in countless interrogations, one that stripped a man down to the truth of himself. "You're making a mistake." Kearns let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Number. The mistake was thinking you could pull rank on me." That's when she saw it, the shift in his stance, the way his right hand twitched near his belt. He was considering it. The air between them thickened, and then a second car pulled up. Red and blue lights swept across the scene as another patrol unit rolled to a stop behind Kearns' cruiser. For the briefest moment, she felt relief. Another officer meant a witness. It meant accountability. But then she saw who stepped out. Another white officer. Tall, broad-shouldered, no nameplate visible in the glare of the headlights. Kearns didn't even glance back. That told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't backup. This was reinforcement. The second officer strode up beside Kearns, his eyes flicking between them before settling on Veronica. "Problem here?" he asked. Kearns smirked. "Just dealing with a non-compliant driver." Veronica stayed silent for a fraction of a second, weighing her options. She was outnumbered now, and Kearns knew it. The second officer took a step closer. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Not FBI Director Caldwell, not even Miss Caldwell, just ma'am. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't a hostile negotiation overseas. This wasn't a tactical mission gone wrong. This was home. And right now, home felt just as dangerous. She inhaled slowly, calculating her next move. Because if she made the wrong one, she wouldn't be the one writing the report tomorrow. They would. Veronica could feel the tension settling in her bones, thick and suffocating. The second officer positioned himself slightly behind Kearns, a silent show of solidarity. This wasn't about law enforcement. This was about power. Veronica's fingers rested against the steering wheel, her mind calculating her next move. If she refused, they would escalate. If she complied, she was at their mercy. There was no good choice. "Ma'am," the second officer repeated, his voice deceptively calm. "Step out of the car. Now." Veronica exhaled slowly through her nose, her pulse steady despite the warning signs screaming at her. She had been in negotiations where a single wrong word could get someone killed. She needed to stay in control. With deliberate slowness, she reached for the door handle, keeping her other hand raised in clear view. Kearns stepped back slightly, giving her just enough room. The moment her feet hit the pavement, the cold night air bit against her skin, amplifying the adrenaline already burning through her veins. She was vulnerable now. Kearns towered over her, his body angled just enough to block the dash cam's view. The second officer stayed a step behind, covering any blind spots. She had no doubt they had done this before. "Turn around," Kearns ordered. Veronica didn't move. "You haven't told me why I'm being detained." Kearns' nostrils flared. Suspicious behavior. "What behavior?" He smirked, shaking his head like she was just another problem to deal with. "Refusing to comply." It was a trap. Refusing to comply would justify escalation. Complying would mean submission. She knew the game. She had read the reports. And then, he grabbed her wrist. Too hard. Too fast. Her instincts kicked in immediately, her body shifting just enough to pull back without appearing aggressive. "Get your hands off me," she snapped, her voice slicing through the night. Kearns didn't let go. The second officer took a step closer. "We got a problem here?" Kearns' grip tightened. "I think she's resisting." The words made her stomach turn. The second officer reached for his radio, his lips already parting to say the words that had justified so many senseless escalations before. "We have a non-compliant suspect." Suspect, not citizen, not FBI director, just suspect. And then, the gun came out. Kearns didn't even hesitate. His hand dropped to his holster, unfastened the snap, and before she could react, the barrel was inches from her face. Time stretched thin, warping around them. Veronica had been trained for crisis situations. She had faced cartel leaders, domestic terrorists, violent criminals. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a road in the middle of nowhere, and she was unarmed. Her breath stayed even. Her hands stayed up, palms open. Everything in her body told her to move, to react. But she knew how that would end. The silence was suffocating. And then Kearns spoke. "Do you feel powerful now?" Veronica felt something inside her shift. This had never been about a traffic stop. This was about humiliation. Her vision tunneled for a split second. Not from fear, from rage. Not for herself. For every name she had seen in reports just like this. For the people who never got to tell their side of the story. She opened her mouth, choosing her next words carefully, because they could be her last. But before she could speak, a voice cut through the night. "Hey, I'm recording this." The shout came from somewhere off to the side, piercing through the thick tension like a blade. It wasn't just the words. It was the force behind them. Somebody had seen, and, more importantly, somebody had proof. Kearns didn't lower his gun, but the shift in his stance was immediate. A flicker of hesitation. A quick glance toward the voice. Veronica followed his gaze, barely turning her head. A man stood near the edge of the road, phone raised, the glow of the screen reflecting off his glasses. He was at a safe distance, but close enough for every detail to be captured. Close enough for the world to see. "You sure you want to do this, officer?" the man called out. His voice was steady, despite the weight of the moment. Kearns' jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. The second officer took a step forward, shifting as if considering damage control. They weren't in control anymore. Veronica saw it in their eyes. The calculation. The panic pressing against their authority. They had gotten comfortable in the shadows. In the silence of unrecorded incidents. But this was different. Kearns exhaled sharply, his fingers still curled around the grip of his gun. His next move would determine everything. Veronica knew she had to push. "Put the weapon down." Her voice cut through the air, stronger than before. Kearns didn't move. His breathing was shallow now, his mind working overtime to figure a way out. The second officer's radio crackled. Unit 47, status. A heartbeat of silence. Then, more sirens. Faint at first, but growing louder. Reinforcements, but not the kind they wanted. Kearns' grip finally loosened. His hand dropped slightly, not holstering the weapon but no longer aiming it directly at her. He turned to the second officer. "Get him to stop recording." Veronica's stomach twisted. She knew what that meant. The second officer moved toward the witness, a hand reaching for something on his belt. Number naught, this time. Veronica stepped forward, her voice razor-sharp. "Touch him, and I will personally have you charged with obstruction of justice." That stopped him. For the first time, uncertainty hung in the air. The power dynamic had shifted, even if just slightly. The sirens were closer now, seconds away. Kearns wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking past her, toward the oncoming lights. His mind was already spinning, searching for an exit strategy. Veronica knew that look. Desperation. And desperate men made reckless choices. She had seconds to ensure she got out of this alive. But was that going to be enough? The sirens were deafening now, flashing lights bouncing off the pavement as multiple squad cars skidded to a stop. The witness kept his phone steady, the red recording light glaring like an unblinking eye. Veronica didn't dare move. Kearns was still holding the gun, but his stance had changed. The confidence, the untouchable arrogance had drained from his face, replaced with something tighter, something bordering on panic. Doors flew open, officers poured out, hands hovered near holsters. But they weren't drawn. They didn't know what they were walking into. Then one of them recognized her. "Director Caldwell?" The name ripped through the tension like a bullet. Kearns barely reacted, but the second officer stiffened. His mouth parted. No words came out. The officer who had spoken, a lieutenant by the insignia on his uniform, looked between them, taking in the scene. Veronica, standing with her hands up. Kearns, still gripping his weapon. The second officer, hovering, unsure what to do next. And then, the witness, camera rolling, documenting every second. Veronica took a breath. And then she dropped her hands to her sides, not in surrender, in reclamation. "Lieutenant, I want these officers detained. Right now." The command was clear, unshaken. The second officer took a step back. "Hold on." Not another word. Veronica's voice was razor-sharp, slicing through whatever excuse he had been about to throw out. "I know exactly what this was, and so does he." She motioned toward the witness whose phone was still locked on them. The lieutenant hesitated. Veronica could see the gears turning. This wasn't just a bad stop. This was a career-ending disaster for whoever let it slide. Kearns must have realized it, too. His fingers finally uncurled from the gun, letting it drop back into the holster. Slow. Controlled. But his expression? Seething. Veronica held his gaze. This time, she wasn't the one afraid. "This is a misunderstanding," Kearns muttered, voice low, like even he knew how pathetic it sounded. Veronica tilted her head slightly. "Oh? Then let's clear it up at headquarters. Call internal affairs. Call the DA. This isn't going away." The second officer swallowed hard. His face had gone pale. The lieutenant finally moved. "Cuff them both," the lieutenant ordered. Kearns snapped. "You've got to be kidding me." His voice was raw, full of the kind of disbelief that comes when a man who has gotten away with everything suddenly realizes he won't. Not this time. Veronica didn't flinch. "You pulled a gun on the director of the FBI, Officer Kearns. Let me know if you'd like to add resisting arrest to the list." She had spent her entire career watching justice almost happen, seeing cases get tangled in red tape, watching victims be treated like suspects. Not tonight. Kearns was still breathing hard when the cuffs clicked around his wrists. The second officer didn't resist. He just stared at the ground, like a man who had finally realized he'd bet on the wrong side. The lieutenant turned to Veronica. "Director, are you—" "Get them out of my sight," she said flatly. And just like that, it was over. Or at least this part was, because Veronica knew this wasn't just about two bad cops. This was about a system that let them thrive. And she wasn't about to let that slide. What came next was even bigger than tonight. The cuffs around Kearns' wrists weren't just metal. They were the weight of consequences, the kind he had avoided his entire career. He stood rigid, his face twisted with disbelief as officers led him and his partner toward the waiting squad cars. He still thought this wouldn't stick. Veronica had seen that look before. Men like him always believed they were untouchable, until they weren't. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay composed. Anger wouldn't serve her now. Action would. The witness still stood on the shoulder of the road, his phone now lowered but still recording. His gaze met hers. "You good?" he asked. Veronica nodded. "Thanks to you." He hesitated. "They do this all the time. Just not to someone like you." That stung in a way Veronica hadn't expected, because he was right. This wasn't new. She just happened to have the power to do something about it. More officers arrived, some eyeing Kearns and his partner with barely concealed judgment. The lieutenant who had taken charge earlier walked back toward her. "Director Caldwell," he started carefully. "Do you want to press charges personally, or—" Veronica shook her head. "This isn't personal. This is systemic. I'll be filing an official report first thing in the morning, and I want internal affairs involved immediately." The lieutenant exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Understood." She wasn't finished. "I also want full access to both of their disciplinary records. Transparency, hesitation." She leveled him with a stare. "If you think I'm letting this get buried, you don't know who you're talking to." Silence, then reluctant agreement. "I'll make the call." Good. Because this wasn't just about one traffic stop. This was about all the ones that never got recorded. The footage hit the news before dawn. By noon, the Justice Department had announced a formal investigation. Kearns was stripped of his badge and booked for assault with a deadly weapon. His partner was suspended indefinitely. The police department released a carefully worded public statement, damage control. But it was too late. The world had already seen the truth, and the truth had consequences. Veronica watched the coverage from her office, fingers steepled under her chin. The story was spreading fast, and she knew what came next. The calls, the press conferences, the political maneuvering, from people who would pretend to care while silently wishing she had just let it go. But she wasn't letting anything go. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. Normally, she wouldn't answer. Tonight, she did. Director Caldwell. A pause, then a familiar voice, the witness from that night. "Just wanted to say, I appreciate what you're doing. Most people wouldn't." Veronica leaned back, a slow breath leaving her chest. "Most people don't have the power to." A pause, then quietly. "But I do." And for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope, because justice doesn't happen in silence. It happens when people refuse to look away. Make sure you're paying attention. If this story moved you, share it, speak up, and never let the truth go unheard.